Leo.
Lieutenant Columbo, police.
The winner is Peter Falk, Columbo.
Network bosses panicked and locked it away. They said it was too dark for television. They claimed audiences weren't ready. But the real reason this Columbo episode stayed buried for 50 years was much more sinister. Today, we're exposing what they tried to hide. When Hollywood came to a grinding halt in early 1960 due to a writer's strike, two struggling screenwriters, Richard Levinson and William Link, found themselves scrambling to make ends meet. But instead of waiting it out, they found a sneaky little loophole. They realized that live TV wasn't included in the strike restrictions. So they went for it. They wrote a murder mystery called Enough Rope for NBC's new live Colors How, the Chevy Mystery Show. It was rushed, desperate, and they even tricked their own agent to get it sold. But in that messy little script, something incredible was born. A rumpled, odd detective named Lieutenant Columbo. They had no idea that this last-ditch effort would turn into a pop culture legend. Character wasn't even entirely original. They'd been reading Stavsky's Crime and Punishment. And the detective in that book, Porfiry Petrovich, gave them the idea. A soft-spoken guy who looked harmless but was actually brilliant. That's what they wanted Columbo to be. Instead of revealing the killer at the end like most stories, they decided to show the killer right at the beginning. That way, the tension came from watching how Columbo with all his quirks and questions would slowly trap them. It was clever, fresh, and psychological, and people loved it. The first ever Columbo was an even Peter Falk. On July 31, 1960, the character was played by Bert Freed in a live broadcast. He did a good job, quiet, watchful, but the real magic was still years away. 2 years later, the story was turned into a play called Prescription Murder, and Thomas Mitchell played Columbo on stage. Audiences liked it, even if it never made it to Broadway. Sadly, that would be Mitchell's final role before his death, but things really changed in 1968. NBC decided to make Prescription Murder into a TV movie. And this time they cast Peter Falk. He wasn't the first choice. Lee J. Cobb and Bing Crosby both said no, but he fit the role perfectly. Falk gave Columbo something new, a strange charm mixed with razor-sharp focus. In that first movie, he was actually Kindoff clean-cut. His hair was neat. His suit was pressed. The famous raincoat made its debut, though, and it stuck around forever. That raincoat, Falk bought it himself during a rainstorm in New York for just $15. He wore it in the movie, then kept wearing it. Turns out it wasn't just some random coat. It was actually made by a high-end Spanish company. But to Falk, it was just the right look. He even started bringing his own clothes to set. The shoes, the suits, even the car. He picked that scruffy old Peugeot himself. It all helped create a detective who felt real, not dressed up by a wardrobe team. What made Columbo even more fascinating was the way Falk played him. He wasn't just acting. He was playing mind games. Falk would improvise lines, get distracted mid-scene, and throw off the actors who were supposed to be guilty. It worked. They looked irritated, nervous, just like their characters should. He might pull out a shopping list instead of evidence or ask to borrow a pencil for no reason. These were tricks, not accidents. The actors weren't in on it, but the audience was. And that made Columbo even more fun to watch. And of course, there's the line. Just one more thing. That catchphrase, it wasn't part of some genius plan. Levinson and Link admitted they only added it because a scene was too short and they didn't want to retype it. So, they had Columbo walk back into the room and say it. And that's how TV's most famous detective move was born. What started as a lazy fix became a signature moment that usually signaled the killer's doom. The Columbo character was so unique that even his name stayed a mystery. In all those years, viewers never really knew his first name. Sometimes you could catch Frank Columbo on a blurry badge, but the creators insisted they never gave him a first name. They wanted it to stay that way. When a trivia writer named Fred Worth made up Philip Columbo as a fake fact to catch copycats, and Trivial Pursuit fell for it, he actually sued them. He lost, but the myth stuck around. Even at Columbo's nephew's wedding, everyone just called him Lieutenant. Imagine going through life and your family doesn't even call you by your first name. Behind the scenes, the casting process was just as intense. Each episode had guest stars who played the killers, and the team often considered dozens of actors for those parts. For one role, they even looked at legends like Orson Welles and Peter Sellers wanted so much money that they had to pass. Falk himself rejected some suggestions. He vetoed Danny Kaye without ever explaining why. When Columbo was first being developed in 1971, NBC executives were skeptical. Actually, they were worried television had rules back then. The hero had to show up right away or people might change the channel, but the creators of Columbo, Richard Levinson and William Link, didn't care about rules. They made the audience wait nearly 30 minutes before Columbo even showed up. That kind of delay had never been done before, and executives call it the longest stage wait in television history. They thought viewers would get bored and leave. But what happened next turned the entire detective genre on its head. Instead of a typical whodunit, the show told you right away who the killer was. That was the twist. You watched the murder happen. You saw how carefully the plan was put together. And then you sat back to see how this quiet, awkward detective would slowly tear that plan apart. People thought knowing the killer would kill the suspense, but it didn't. It made things more intense. It became a game of how he would catch them, not if he would. And Columbo didn't use guns or car chases. He used polite questions, everyday logic and an eye for tiny details like a smudge on a wine glass or a thermostat set too low. But there was something else underneath it all that made Columbo so powerful. It was about class. Columbo wasn't rich. He drove a beat-up car, wore the same wrinkled coat every day, smoked cheap cigars, and talked about his wife constantly. And the people he went after, they were surgeons, actors, CEOs, generals, people who thought they were too important to get caught. Columbo never treated them like they were special. In fact, he often made them uncomfortable. He'd ask what their expensive painting cost or mention that his wife had something similar at home just to see how they'd react. The show quietly exposed how the rich assumed they were untouchable, and Columbo made sure they weren't. At one point, NBC tried to interfere. After only a few episodes, they pushed the creators to change the format. They wanted Columbo to appear earlier, and they wanted more traditional storytelling, but the team refused. Levinson, Link, the producer, William Furman, and even Peter Falk himself all stood their ground. They said they would quit before changing the show's heart. It was a huge gamble, but it worked. Viewers loved it. Ratings climbed and the executives backed off. From the moment it premiered on September 15, 1971, Columbo was something different. It aired as part of NBC's mystery movie rotation, sharing space with other detective shows, but it quickly became the favorite. And Peter Falk's performance was a big reason why that season he won an Emmy. Over the years, he won 4 more for the role along with a Golden Globe. His messy charm and careful delivery made Columbo unforgettable. He wasn't flashy. So, he throws a dart at a list of celebrities in his building and picks someone he finds cheap and fake. He calls them a public zircon, a fake diamond, not worth much in his eyes. His twisted plan gets even darker when he decides to make a documentary about it and includes Columbo himself in the footage without the detective knowing. It gets meta fast. There are even 3 students following Columbo with cameras. One of them named Spielberg. A wink to the real Spielberg who had already directed a nearly episode of the show. But the timing wasn't in De Palma's favor. The strike had left the show behind schedule and producers were scrambling. Another script called Double Exposure by Stephen J. Kell was also submitted during the strike. It was faster to shoot and had Avalanche who used subliminal images to commit murder. A cool idea, but easier to manage on a tight schedule. De Palma's script was more complicated, full of visual tricks and layered storytelling. The producers liked it, maybe even more than some of the episodes they ended up making, but they just didn't have the time or resources. Some bits from De Palma's work were borrowed later, like the film's student idea, which showed Yup in the episode Mind Over Mayhem. That version even had a character named Steven Spielberg, spelled slightly differently, but clearly a nod to what D'Alma had written. The real problem was tone. Columbo usually featured killers with clear, selfish motives: money, revenge, power. D'Alma's villain didn't care about any of that. He wanted to make a point to commit murder as an artistic experiment. It reminded Peepleaf Hitchcock's Rope, where the killers thought they were smarter than everyone else. But that wasn't what Columbo was about. The producers probably felt the audience wouldn't connect with such a cold, strange character. D'Alma's usual themes, watching people through cameras, blurring the line between truth and performance, were powerful, but they didn't fit the cozy Sunday evening feel of the show. Some people even imagined John Lithgow in the lead role, but they worried he was too tall and intimidating for TV at the time. In the end, the episode was shelved. Buried under production stress and creative differences, Columbo had a formula and it worked. The killer is shown in the beginning. The mystery is never about who did it, but how Columbo will catch them. Slow, clever, and polite, he always sniffed out the truth. But then came No Time to Die in 1992 and everything changed. There was no murder at the start, no calm investigation, just panic, screaming, chloroform, and a disturbing kidnapping during a honeymoon. It felt more like a horror film than a Columbo episode. Instead of quiet deduction, Columbo teamed up with a police unit, held Agin, and raced against time. The final moments ended in gunfire. Nothing like the Columbo fans had known. Some call it bold. Most called it the worst episode ever. But it wasn't the only time the show took a strange turn. When Columbo returned in 1989 after 11 years, it did so with Murder, Smoke, and Shadows, a Hollywood-themed episode that pushed theatricality to absurd levels. The villain was a flashy young film